to me, psychological safety is not to feel comfortable all the time, but to be comfortable even in uncomfortable situations. There are many ways of facilitating retrospectives, but I am aware that some ways are better than others, which is why I wrote the book.
A lot of the practice is actually creating safe discomfort. I mean, maybe I just read it as a book of my mistakes.
This episode was made possible thanks to Gotopia.tech.
Hi there, I'm John Ledrew and I'm an Agile coach.
Hi there, I'm Aino Corry and I'm also an Agile coach.
Well, hi Aino, it's nice to see you.
So nice to see you too, John.
In strange circumstances, but it's still nice to see you.
Yeah. So
I believe that that you've written a book.
You're right, I have.
I know, and amazingly, for us just to bump into each other, I have a copy as well. And as I've known you a little while, I also know, and you know, that we both have miraculously an interest in Agile antipatterns. And so I was just thinking back to when not when we first met, but when we met up, I think it was GOTO Chicago a few years ago.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting was that I delivered a workshop on psychological safety. And then immediately afterwards, I think the second day or the third day, you were doing a workshop on retrospective antipatterns. And I gate crashed your thing because it was raining. And I decided Chicago was best when it wasn't raining, although it shows how little I know about Chicago because I think that gives me about 2 days a year to actually see it. But I gate crashed. And what was really interesting was, firstly, I think 3 or 4 of the people that were in your workshop had attended mine. And something that struck me when I was in there was actually how much crossover there was between psychological safety and retrospectives, for obvious reasons, I think. But could you maybe go into that a little bit? Because obviously a huge amount of, when I was going through the book, there is this underlying thing to me, which seems in almost all of the anti-patterns, that there's this underlying thread of safety being really important. And that's something that's really important to me. And I was just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that first I have to say what I believe psychological safety is. And to me, psychological safety is not to feel comfortable all the time, but to be comfortable even in uncomfortable situations. So that you can go into a situation where there's some sort of conflict or where there's people who disagree on things and you have to do something for the first time and you can still feel okay with it. To me, that's psychological safety. And I agree that there's a huge overlap with how to do good retrospectives. There are many ways of facilitating retrospectives, but I am aware that some ways are better than others, which is why I wrote the book. And the thing about feeling safe in a retrospective is really important, because the point with the retrospective is that as a team you should share and appreciate and learn from what has happened. And if you don't feel safe, you might not want to share the things that didn't go very well, because maybe you want to cover up that something went wrong, you made a mistake, or you were afraid or sad about something somebody said. And also, it's very difficult to appreciate what happened. And with appreciate, I mean both appreciating in the positive and the negative sense, acknowledging that these things happened and it actually didn't make us a better team. And I think you're not really able to acknowledging that in honest unless you have the safety. And then the last thing about learning, I think it's really important to learn to feel safe. And that's also something that I apply a lot when I'm teaching at the university, is that if the students don't feel safe to ask questions, if they don't feel safe to say there's something they don't understand, then it's very difficult to learn.
That's really interesting. So there's a couple of things that stuck out there for me. That the first one around being kind of comfortable, almost being uncomfortable. And that's something that I really, certainly in my own practice when I'm delivering retrospectives, and anyone that has been in a retrospective that I've facilitated, I think in the last 4 or 5 years will testify to this, is that a lot of the practice is actually creating safe discomfort. And what I mean by that is often that thing whereby, in fact, a nice story is I delivered a retrospective where I'd done a game called Animal Lineup at the beginning. And this game involves asking you tell everyone as they come in the room, you just say, think of an animal along with a sound and an action, but keep it secret for now. And they all come in the room, obviously completely freaking out, obviously, about what on earth this is going to be about and what I'm going to get them to do.
Yeah.
And then when they're in, you might have done some other funny enough safety check exercise first, and they probably all feel really unsafe because I still haven't told them what the hell I'm going to do with this animal thing. And I just say, to their horror, or I just want you to line up in order of your animal size. And what I'd like you to do is the only way you can communicate is with the sound and the action that you came up with. And obviously what happens then is hilarious because then there's all of these interesting social things that happen, which is that they get into the need to, they all do it even though they feel really uncomfortable, because the majority will do it because it would be really uncomfortable for them not to. And they do it anyway, and they all get there, and then you'll have some people kind of walking around. I normally love seeing somebody will kind of walk up to someone and go, meep, 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 and they'll be replied with, rawr, like this or something. And at one point, I remember two people were kind of stood in front of each other going like this. And I just wandered up and said, all right, you can talk. What's going on here? And he said, well, we're just trying to work out what's bigger, an Indian or an African elephant. I was like, so I'm amazed that you even had any of that conversation going on. I'm guessing you now know what the context of this conversation is. So after this had happened, it was very funny, lots of people laughing. Right at the end of the retro, and we had actually had quite an interesting conversation where one of the team members had given kind of really good but quite difficult feedback to somebody else on the team, specifically that they'd made jokes that made a lot of other people feel a bit uncomfortable, and they'd had what was actually a direct but very respectful conversation about this in front of the team. And afterwards I'm clearing up, and one of the guys comes up to me, this old dude who's this guy in his mid-50s. He's like, well, I don't know in European measurements, but he's about 6'8", which I think is,
that's tall.
Like,
in European measurement, that's tall.
Yeah, very tall. Yeah, even by European standards, even by Scandinavian standards. Yeah, yes, that's the exact European standard.
Yeah,
it's the and he's this kind of tall guy from Essex, and he just goes, "Gore, John, these retros, they're almost emotional," like this. And he goes, "But I guess once you pretended to be an elephant in front of your peers, anything else goes, right?" And I remember thinking after we spoke about it, I was like, that's absolutely right, which is what actually seemed to happen, was that what we ended up creating with some of these silly games, and I know we've both done kind of similar warm-up style exercises at different times, is that you create these situations that are really uncomfortable but perceived as being really socially risky, but actually they're not. It's like they're not really risky at all because everybody does them. But what you end up doing is by the time they come back to something that feels really safe in comparison, just giving feedback, it's like which is actually something genuinely socially risky, which is what I find funny, is that giving direct feedback is really socially risky.
There's something at stake
but by
there.
that point, it almost feels safe now in comparison to pretending to be an elephant.
Yeah, that's true.
To me, I don't know whether or not you've had a similar experience with kind of exercises or noticing that change in behavior when you do
I have
some sort of
several
exercise.
of those, but as you know, since my book is about antipatterns, I prefer to talk about my failures, which and as it turns out, everybody else thinks is more fun anyway. So I'm definitely on board with having them do weird things and answer weird questions, and I explain to them that it's because I want to build trust, and if they build a relationship with each other, that's a huge element of trust to build that relationship. But one of the things that I remember that failed utterly for me is that I once had it was a new team of men in an IT company many years ago, and the retrospective had been sort of negative. They'd been focusing very much on negativity, and which, I mean, it's understandable because they wanted to learn, but I think it's also a good idea to focus on the positive things that you want to do more of. But they had been a bit negative, so I thought in the end I would sort of cheer them up by having the appreciation game. So I made them all stand in a circle. They didn't really like to stand in a circle because they thought, well, that's really weird. But I made them stand in the circle. And then I had a little ball with me, and I threw the ball to some of them, and then I said, so this is an appreciation game. So I throw this ball to you, and I appreciate you for something that you said earlier, which I think was great. And now you look around and you find somebody in your team that you want to appreciate, and then you say that appreciation and you throw the ball. It could be, thank you for helping me at that time, or thank you for always saying good morning, or thank you for that delicious cake, or thank you for that code review, or something like anything. It could be anything. And then the man who caught the ball, he sort of looked at the ball, and then he looked around at everybody else in the circle, and then he looked at the ball again, and then he just dropped the ball on the floor. And that did not create psychological safety in that retrospective. And I think that if it had happened now, I would have done something about it, but back then it just really made me frustrated and sad and feeling really bad at facilitating retrospectives. So sometimes these activities and games, they can also fail miserably, and I think it's also important to say that to facilitators who are not that experienced yet. You hear us making all these interesting, funny games, but sometimes they fail, and it's important to know what you do then. How do you get something out of that as well? How do you get on? How do you move on from that? And also sometimes they hear about a game or an activity and they want to do it because John did it or Aino did it.
Yeah.
But if they don't really believe in it, then it doesn't really work for them, right? So you really have to believe yourself that it's a good idea to make them say an animal sound and an animal activity.
It's an interesting question that, like, how much of navigating our way as facilitators out of, let's just say, challenging situations like that, but how much of that is something that you kind of have to experience it, I think, almost. Like, I don't know whether, like, I can probably millions, thousands of times in a long time of facilitating, I've had, difficult individuals, frustrating situations that I was able to navigate out of, and situations that, I don't know, I just walked out of.
Yeah.
Leaving the team. Who knows? Probably. But I don't think, in that era of continuous learning, I don't think that I could do. I think I learned from every single one of those, if you see what I mean. Like, I needed that massive discomfort of standing there with, for me, I remember it was a team member, we were just doing a simple check-in game, say two words to check in. And the team member just said, he said, retrospective ROI.
It's a good start, isn't it?
It was, actually. I was just like, wow, this is going to be.
Yeah, well, I sometimes ask the people at the retrospective, so what do you expect to get out of the retrospective? And then sometimes if they say, I don't expect to get anything out of this retrospective, I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. You're making my job so easy. If you don't expect to get anything out of it, that's easy for me to accomplish, definitely. So trying to turn it into like a joke, I think, works as well sometimes. But and I agree with you to an extent that it's difficult to learn from other people's mistakes, which is, everybody who's been a teenager knows that you cannot learn from your parents' mistakes. You have to do them yourself at least one time. And yet then why did I write this book about antipatterns, which is to make people avoid doing my mistakes? And I think that what you can get out of hearing about other people's mistakes is that maybe that you're aware that they're there, and perhaps you can do something at least to avoid or at least recognize when you're there. But also I think, and this is important, to know that other people, even experienced retrospective facilitators, have been in this situation. And you're not the only one. It's not because you are tremendously stupid or bad at facilitating. I mean, it could be, but that's not necessarily why these things happen.
I think that, to me, the interesting thing that I got from, I mean, maybe this is just from the same perspective as you in many ways, because I think as I was going through it, I was just kind of like going, oh yeah, I remember doing that. And, oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So it was kind of, but what I found refreshing, I guess, is that it's not, I mean, maybe it is just a book of, the funny thing is I didn't see it as a book of your mistakes when I was reading it. I saw it as, I mean, maybe I just read it as a book of my mistakes.
That's okay. That's okay.
Which is probably easier. No, but what I mean is I was reading it through more as seeing I remember that situation. And then it was interesting to see how somebody else navigated their way out of that. It's like, it's interesting seeing situations. Yeah. I mean, things like obviously very recently, and it's become more prominent, things like the peekaboo problem, people not turning their camera on, which is such a big problem, for right now, and has become more of a challenge recently. And it was, and interestingly, lots of people, when we had people that were remote on the particular client that I'm thinking of now, where they were people remote pre-COVID, they would turn their cameras off, and but actually they would often turn them on pre-COVID if they were remote, whereas now it's much more challenging for me to encourage people. But I find that it's like interesting seeing those, and kind of, I just saw them as oh great, something else for me to try, as opposed to, but maybe that is just the perspective of somebody that can recognize those challenges.
I think it makes a huge difference that you are as or even more experienced in facilitating retrospectives than me. I remember when the Gang of Four book came out, the one about the design patterns for object-oriented programming. There, you could sort of divide people into two groups. There was a group of people who did not have a lot of experience in object-oriented analysis and design and programming, and they loved it. They learned a lot from it. They were like, oh, wow, all these things we want to try, and of course, and then they overdid it, right? And we had singletons in every single design. And then there was the other group of people who were experienced with object orientation, and they said, this is simple, this is trivial, we all know this before. And because of that, I'm happy that my book comes now 30 years later, because now people have I hope people appreciate that even if you read something in the book that it can be worthwhile to have a vocabulary to talk about it. Now, you said peekaboo, and all the different names of the antipatterns I think are important, because if people can talk about it, they can talk about things in a higher level of abstraction. And I can say to you, for example, that I ran into some personal problems a few weeks ago, and I was, sometimes when you things just pile up on your head, and you think, oh, there's this and there's this and there's this and there's this and there's this, and you feel so small and dark and insignificant and stupid and without any energy. And then my husband said, isn't there something in the book that can help you? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm in the soup. That's where I am. I'm in the soup. Both feet well planted in the soup. And I used the exercise, which is in the book, which I didn't invent, but it's in the book, with the 3 circles about what you can do, what you can sort of influence, and what you just have to learn to live with. And that helped me, not out of my problems, but out of my sort of reaction to the problems. So I like that way of being able to communicate it. And now when I say that to you, you understand what I mean.
That's a really interesting point, actually. It's something that I mean, obviously you, our mutual friend, Linda Rising, and she's also quite a big fan of patterns.
Yeah, you can say that.
And you could, a fan of patterns. And we, many of our conversations have spoke like that idea of that the real value in patterns is that being able to give a name to something.
Yes.
And it's funny actually how that old, the old programming joke of the, the hardest things, the whatever it is, the is it the 3 hardest things are naming things, cache invalidation, and off by 1 errors.
Yes, and off by 1 errors.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Subscribe to the GOTO YouTube channel now for ad-free videos released almost daily, and join the experts in person or online at any upcoming GOTO conference using the promo code Book Club. Visit gotopia.tech to learn more.